Hi, everyone. As Lucas mentioned, my name is Frances. I'm the head of the English team at Supertext, and I'll be doing a presentation on positivity. Now, when I pitched this as a topic, it was back in February or March, so depending on your perspective, it's either aged very poorly as a topic or aged very well as a topic. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So first of all, why have a presentation about positivity? And what does this have to do with translation? Well, this is an extremely challenging time for everyone across the world. We need to acknowledge that a lot of people are suffering and the situation might not change anytime soon. But we also need to find hope where we can, maintain relationships with each other, and stay motivated. I want to share with you Supertext's approach to staying positive and hopefully make you feel a bit better about your career choice if you're experiencing any doubts. But first, I want to clear something up. Well, you might all be familiar with the positive thinking movement popularized by books like The Power of Positive Thinking and The Secret. These basically claim that the secret to success is to think positive thoughts and good things will come to you. Sounds pretty easy. Of course, if that's what works for you, then go for it. But at Supertext, we prefer to take a more practical approach. Yes, we do believe that anything is possible, but it's made possible by dedication and hard work, not by wishful thinking. Think about the accomplishments you're most proud of. For example, a great transcreation of a headline. Was it something that came to you immediately? If you're anything like me, you probably stared at the source for half an hour, then wrote and deleted 20 different options, then closed your laptop in a fit of frustration when the page was still blank. Then the perfect option came to you while you were folding your laundry. Was that inspiration? Maybe, but you probably wouldn't get there without the time, without the frustration. Now that that's all cleared up, let's talk about translation. While the current crisis has impacted all of us differently, most translators have been feeling its effects. Some agencies have lowered their rates, your workload might have dropped off, and clients are looking increasingly at machine translation solutions, or just not ordering. But looking at the big picture, there is a flip side to that too. The reason there has been such a strong push for automation in the translation industry isn't that language is easy to automate. It isn't. In fact, it's probably the absolute hardest thing to automate. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed how terrible Word's grammar check is. The reason is that the need for content in different languages is higher than ever, as Lucas mentioned. Thanks to the internet, there has been an explosion of the amount of content available for translation, and that is a trend that is growing exponentially. While clients might not be able to pay for translations right now, that trend is not going anywhere. What's more, companies have a much more international client base than they once had. And research shows that people are much more likely to interact with content that is in their native language. So the truth is, there still aren't enough translators to translate all the content that companies want to translate or should translate. So in this challenging environment, how do we stay motivated? Let's zoom out. So why do we do what we do? And how do we find fulfillment professionally? If you're a translator, you're probably not in it for the money. You're probably in this industry because, like us, you have a passion for languages. In Japan, there's a concept called ikigai, which basically is a word for the reason you get up in the morning. It doesn't need to be related to work or money, but the Venn diagram shown here has been adapted to correspond to professional fulfillment. The difference between ikigai and happiness is that happiness is a temporary state, while ikigai is what keeps us motivated even through harder times when we maybe aren't so happy. It is the intersection of our values, our passions, and the things we're good at. Think of what might fall into these three categories for you. You might come up with things like languages, translation, writing, communication, learning new things, or reading. These are all integral parts of the industry we work in. At Supertext, we try to ensure we maintain a sense of purpose even through difficult times. There are things we all have in common that help us to achieve this. We're all passionate about languages and value creativity. We believe in hard work as well as having fun. After all, most of you will know that being creative is harder than the more boring stuff. We try to foster a feedback culture that allows us to continue to develop and grow. And we look at the big picture and try not to sweat the small stuff. We prioritize communication both within the company and with our freelancers. That's part of the reason why we're holding an event like this. So, what is the key to staying positive? Even though I'm still a New Yorker at heart and definitely have a cynical side, I'm still somehow pretty content and I can stay positive. I'll share what works for me, which is very much in line with the Supertext culture that I just explained. It really comes down to three overarching ideas which are relevant for the translation industry and beyond. So the first thing is to look at the big picture. This might be obvious, but in times like these, we have to think more long-term. This isn't the first time the world has found itself in a crisis. We've survived before and will survive again. This is a rough year, but we as translators still have a future. The need for linguists across different languages hasn't disappeared and won't disappear as long as we live in a global society. Also, looking at the big picture, we can remind ourselves why we do what we do. We all love language, and we all believe in the power of translation. In terms of ikigai, looking at the big picture also means focusing on what's important. For some of you, that might be your careers, but for most of you, it's probably your family, your friendships, and your personal relationships. The second key is communication. As translators and copywriters, we are communicators. And successful relationships, both professional and personal, are built on strong communication. As a result, I would say that communication is really the foundation of long-term well-being. While good communication might not have prevented something like COVID from starting, it very well could have prevented it from spreading to the extent that it did. And while we certainly don't have control over all of our circumstances, being a good communicator will give you much more power than you think you have. But what exactly does effective communication mean? In my mind, effective communication comes down to four things. It should be honest, truthful, and direct. It should be immediate and contextual. It should be specific. And it should be empathetic. I'll give you an example from the translation industry. Let's say you get unjustified feedback from a client who is unhappy. They send a text back with a bunch of incorrect changes and ask for a response. There are multiple ways of communicating with this client and dealing with the situation. The easiest way would probably be to say yes to all their changes, even when you recognize that they're wrong. But this approach will leave you feeling resentful, probably. You could ignore or put off replying to their email, but that might hurt the relationship with the client. Well, what about this approach? Respond to the request straight away. Be honest, the changes don't seem to make sense. Be specific, give examples of what is incorrect and explain why. Be empathetic. The person you're communicating with is probably under a lot of stress, and they're probably not even the person giving the feedback to begin with. So be polite and objective in your email. This type of communication might be more complicated and take more time than another approach, but it will ultimately improve your relationship with a client. They will know you take their concerns seriously, they will know that you are knowledgeable and the expert, and they'll hopefully put more trust in you the next time around. One way to think about empathy is using the so-called 4 sides communication model. This model expresses the idea that communication has 4 levels. There's the factual level, the level that covers the facts, what you're actually saying without the connotations. The self-revealing level demonstrates something the speaker is saying about themselves, their values, what motivates them. The relationship level reveals how the speaker and listener, the sender and receiver of the information, relate to one another. And the appeal level is what the speaker wants the listener to do. Misunderstandings happen when these different levels are interpreted differently. Take the above example. So the translator might assume the person sending the email is making a personal judgment about the translation, even though, as I said, they're probably just getting that from their boss. And if the translator responds in a way that isn't totally objective, the client might feel attacked or disrespected, or like the translator doesn't take their needs seriously. We need to cut through all that. The key, of course, is to figure out how to avoid misinterpretation. Managing this can help you get what you want without hurting or offending others. I'll give you another example from my personal life. When I was in middle school, I was not popular. I was frequently bullied and made fun of. I usually reacted to these incidents the same way most kids do, by lashing out and getting angry, or by keeping to myself and crying. But one time, when someone was making my life difficult, something clicked and I took a completely different approach. I looked them straight in the eye and I told them directly, "You're hurting my feelings." Their face completely changed, they apologized, and that person never bothered me again. If earnesty and directness can work with a middle school child, it can work with anyone. And lastly, be mindful of what you're grateful for. In some ways, this is similar to looking at the big picture. What things are you grateful for? If you're anything like me, you're grateful to have a job that you like, even if it isn't easy. Like some of you, translation wasn't my first job out of school. I worked as an English teacher for a bit, and then as a paralegal at a law firm in New York. For a long time, I honestly assumed jobs were exclusively a means to a salary, and it wasn't possible for them to be fun or fulfilling. I remember quitting my job at the law firm and feeling like I had amnesia because I could hardly remember what I had been doing at the job I spent so much time at. It was like 2 years of my life had just gone missing. It wasn't until I began translating after coming to Berlin that I realized I could enjoy a job. I could have a career where I learned something new every day, no matter how long I did it. I'll never forget that aha moment I had the first time I translated, and I remain thankful that I can work in a field that combines so many of my interests. But when you think about what you're grateful for, you don't have to start with something as big as a career. You can start with something small and add one thing to your list each day. For example, I'm grateful for the park in my neighborhood, for autumn weather, and for oolong tea. There are some other more basic day-to-day tips we can all keep in mind whether or not we're translators. Yes, these are very straightforward, but they can have a big impact. Especially in times like these, it's really easy to get in a negative spiral and think that things will never get better. When that happens, it's important to reset, sort of like a computer reboots. Close your eyes and take 3 deep, long breaths. Stay active, even if that just means taking a walk periodically. Force yourself to take breaks. Work you do when you're panicking or highly stressed usually isn't of great quality anyway, so it's especially important to take a break when you have a long to-do list. You can also keep a plant or a card that makes you laugh on your desk. After all, humor is what will really get us through all of this. It's also good to switch off periodically. The fact that we've all been stranded at home and mostly unable to travel means that we've been even more connected. But being glued to social media isn't necessarily good for our mental health, especially when you consider those doomsday articles about how machines are going to take over your job. Try leaving your phone at home when you go out and keep it off when you're having a socially distant barbecue with friends. But even if we switch off periodically, we still need to maintain our friendships. Use your phone to stay in touch with friends directly rather than via Facebook. Think of a friend you haven't been in touch with for a while and reach out to them. Over the last 5 months, I've been part of a weekly movie club with some friends back in the States, and I've actually spoken more with them in these 5 months than I have in the last 8 years. So what do you do to de-stress? I'm really curious, so I set up a poll, and if you go to the Q&A tab, you can take part, and Lucas will share the results after the Guess the Lyrics game. So to review, how can we stay positive? First, look at the big picture and put things into perspective. Secondly, learn how to communicate in a way that empowers you and allows people to understand you better. We're all human beings looking for connection. Third, think about what you're grateful for, what makes you feel lucky, and try to remind yourself of this often. And finally, take it step by step. Start small. Maybe reread one of your favorite books or call an old friend. And I really need to emphasize this. I really think the world just needs more strong communicators. And once we figure that out, we'll all get to a better place. And finally, I'll be happy to answer some questions. Okay, I see a few questions here. So the first one is, how do I keep problems in my personal life from impacting my professional life? So I think this is a really important question, especially for freelancers and people who are now working from home. So first of all, one thing I should say is if you're having really serious problems in your personal life, maybe it will inevitably impact your professional life, and you need to sort of take a break and acknowledge that instead of trying to force yourself to do something you maybe don't feel comfortable doing. Sometimes we have to keep working anyway, and in that case, it's really important to keep a separation between your personal life and your professional life. So if you're working from home, still have a separate workstation for your work and a workstation for, and then your personal space, have a separate work email and personal email, and sort of try to keep those separate so you don't feel the influence of you don't feel your personal life really impacting your professional life as much. And the next question is, can you talk about the relationship between positivity and performance? There have been a lot of studies that show that happy employees perform better than less happy employees. And so I think that's definitely something that if you're a manager or someone who works with a team, to keep in mind that it's really of vital importance that everyone in the team is happy. If you're working independently, I think it's I don't think you should necessarily need to put pressure on yourself to be positive in order to perform better. That's just sort of a positive side effect. Next one, not a question, but your presentation made me think of nonviolent communication. I'm not sure you've heard of it. It helps a lot when dealing with frustration due to communication issues, which is something we deal with on a daily basis as translators. So I have not read that book, but that's a recommendation for all of you then, nonviolent communication. And then coming from a straight to business culture, I find it hard to communicate with clients on a neutral but empathetic level. How much do you think our cultural background impacts what we perceive to be good communication, and how would you tackle this? So I think cultural background definitely can have a big impact on what we perceive to be good communication. I think it's maybe not the easiest answer, but it can be really helpful to kind of do some research on the type of culture that you're discussing, that you're communicating with, and that will help in how you communicate with them. So like one example, this isn't in the translation industry, but my aunt runs a photography gallery, and she organizes exhibitions with different art directors across the world. And she once had to do a project with some art directors in India. And in India, they have a very different communication style than in Germany. So in Germany, it's very direct, and you say what you want. And in India, it's much more, you start with, hello, sir, and it's very complicated, and you really kind of have to suck up to the person you're communicating with before getting to your point. So she actually, she had some kind of frustrating interaction with them, and she said something very offensive. And so at first they wanted to cancel the entire exhibition. And then she kind of crawled back in there with one of these very self-effacing long messages saying, yes, thank you, good sir, complicated sentences. So unfortunately, I think probably the most effective way is just to do research on the culture that you're communicating with. An extra observation. As a freelancer, it is important to share issues with other translators. They're in the same boat and can often empathize where others cannot. Have you also found this? Yes, so I used to work as a freelancer before I joined Supertext. But I mean, if you're a freelance translator, it can be really helpful to have your network for so many reasons, even beyond empathy. But I think that's one of the things I like working here as a language manager is all the language managers have experience in translation. They might not have worked as a freelancer specifically, but I think that sort of helps with the communication with freelancers as opposed to another agency where you just have project managers who maybe don't have that translation experience. Another one. How can you stay positive when you read the news? So that's definitely a tough one. So first I should say, I think when we read the news today, the tendency is to kind of read a bunch of headlines, especially if you're on social media, and you're maybe not even reading the full article, you're just reading all the like doomsday headlines. And I don't think that's an approach to the news that will give anyone any sense of hope. So first of all, like I said, I think it's important to switch off. It's there's kind of this idea that if you maybe spend 1 hour not looking at headlines, you're just going to kind of fall off the bandwagon and not know what's going on. And the truth is, if you're just reading headlines or reading really short So the shorter style of journalism, you don't know what's going on anyway. You don't have the context. A lot of that information can be misleading. So maybe take an approach to news where you have a few outlets that you really trust, read longer form journalism. And even though that maybe won't necessarily make you feel more positive, it's a sort of a more empowering way of consuming the news that's a bit more satisfying as opposed to this, looking at headlines and getting into this negative spiral. I have found that the easiest way to find the best way to respond to a client's query is to put yourself in their shoes first. Do you also do this? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I really think that's the best way to respond to any request, whether it's from a client or in your personal life, is it's sort of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is, the golden rule. So if yeah, it's always important to put yourself in the other person's in the other person's shoes. And yeah, definitely with clients, you always just have to be respectful and see where they're coming from. There's another one. What is the best advice to become your favorite freelancer in Supertext? What are the most important mistakes we as freelancers make? What can we improve? So I'm not sure that has to do with positivity specifically, but I think it kind of comes down to a few things. So first of all, be a great translator. So that means submitting things on time. It means the quality of your translations is good. It means communicating with us early if there's an issue with the translation. It means showing that you really do your research. And then there's also response times. So how quickly you respond to requests. If it takes you a while to respond, obviously that's an understandable dilemma to be in, but it can, if say you're out and about, you can and don't want to accept in the portal yet, you can write a quick email saying, I'm interested, but I'll have a closer look when I'm at home. It just makes things run a lot more quickly if we can know right away if someone is able to do a job. And then it also comes back down to communication, as I discussed before. I mean, in the English team specifically, I really feel like everybody communicates really well. I've had really positive experiences with freelancers, but sometimes with some newer people who sign up, the communication style isn't always, it can sometimes be a little bit antagonistic. And so definitely avoid that. It's really just being friendly and, it's obviously important to bring up concerns, but do that in sort of a respectful way. One more. Idea: if you read the news, reformulate and rewrite some of them for fun and write your own news. Happy news. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I think there's a long there's this old saying that, like, if it bleeds, it leads, which means that the worst news is kind of displayed at the front. And I don't want to sugarcoat it because there are a lot of bad things going on right now, but basically, I mean, if things are going fine, there's not going to be a news story about it. So even, there's still a lot of things that are fine. I think that's all the questions for now. Oh wait, is there one more? Remember, everyone, that smiling releases endorphins and serotonin, even fake smiles and laughs. Don't forget to smile whenever you can. Yeah, I don't have that problem because I smile all the time anyway, but yes. Okay. I think that might be it for questions. So I will go back to Gus.